Presenting the Orange Blossom Trailblazers with your hosts, Catherine Cochia and Talitha Anderson.
Hey, Talitha.
Hey, Catherine.
Oh my gosh. Wait till you hear this week's podcast.
I'm so excited for this week's podcast.
We have Dr. Judith Rodriguez, who has done so much. We are talking about a former Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics president.
Oh my gosh. There is something in the water with Florida. All these Florida, leaders that have gone on to become leaders and presidents of the Academy. Wow. It's something in the swamp water. I don't know.
I don't know, but I'm not going to spoil the surprises for you. But I just want you to pay attention while you're listening to this one about her journey, because the way that she is able to innovate and develop a game plan for herself shows what you like to call your Nick Saban attitude. This woman has it and more. You are going to love this one.
Listen, Catherine, I love a good game plan. So I'm super excited to dive into this episode. So without further ado, let's get into this episode and hear the game plan that Dr. Judith Rodriguez has for us. And we'll see you at the end of the episode.
Thank you so much for coming today and talking to me a little bit about your history and your experience with the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. I always like to start with the same question. What made you want to become a dietitian?
Oh, good question. It's a good question because I have to think back really far back. I think I always enjoyed, of course, food preparation and also different types of foods, eating different types of food and learning about different types of food. And to be honest, as a high school teenager, I wasn't sure I knew what I wanted to do. So what I actually did was I applied to different universities and applied to different majors. And then I got a scholarship offer at New York University where I had applied for home economics and nutrition. And I thought, well, this is too good a deal to pass up. And so I decided to go there. And once I was there, I really enjoyed the nutrition courses. And of course, I think NYU at the time had a fabulous faculty who were great mentors. And I also made some friends in the department of the nutrition, one of which I'm still in contact with. So it was a combination of things. It was my interest, but also the sense of a welcoming environment and feeling supported by other students. So that sort of put me in the nutrition trajectory and kept me there. And I think that's an important thing for people to understand if they want student retention, because it's one thing to bring in a student. It's another thing to help them get through the program, through all the different elements that it encompasses. One of them is, of course, the academic success, but also the sense of feeling included and feeling welcome, but also of being mentored and helped by people who are in the profession, who are smart, and who can guide you.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Of course, following the money, because that is important when we're a student. We don't have that much money and resources, so finding the place that you can afford. But I love that point about making people feel at home and comfortable in the major and feel like they're part of the community.
Yes, yes. I still remember some of the faculty, and I'm actually still friends with one of them. And I think that if they hadn't been as supportive as they were, I probably wouldn't have stayed in the major.
Because it's not an easy major.
No, it's not. People assume it's just fun prepping, and then you find out, what the heck is biochemistry?
So much science, so much science.
Yeah.
So you have had a really interesting career. When I was looking into all of the things that you've done, you started out in clinical dietetics. You then moved into a more community setting, working with the Extended Food and Nutrition Education Program at Cornell, where you designed materials for residents that lived in Harlem, Spanish Harlem, Lower East Side. So really getting diverse populations within the work you were doing. And then you were part of the CDC's Hispanic Health and Nutrition Examination Survey that was launched from 1982 to 1984, really focusing on 3 of those Hispanic subgroups that were missing from the literature, Mexican Americans, Cuban Americans, and Puerto Ricans. Can you tell me a little bit about all of those experiences?
Okay. Well, I did do clinical for a while, but I just felt like it wasn't me. And I truly admire clinical dietitians. I mean, some of the ones that I had been working with when I was doing clinical had been there for 20 years. They love their job. They're so passionate. But I really liked the idea of being in a real world, what I call the real world setting. And I liked the idea of working with different populations in their environment. So I was lucky in that I actually got 2 jobs after I left clinical. The first one was actually with WIC, and WIC had recently started, so I'm aging myself. But the WIC program that I worked on was very unique in that the reason I got the job was because they needed an evening and weekend dietitian. And so I wanted to test the waters. So I actually did clinical in the mornings, and then I would run over to Brooklyn and do community at night. And I came to love that aspect of my work. It was an interesting area because it was a low-income area, but it had a very large Hasidic Jewish population. At the time, some African Americans had converted to Islam. So I had African Americans who were, Muslim, and also vegetarianism was starting to get popular. So I had a lot of vegan clients. And it also had a large immigrant population from Latin America, from different parts of South America. So that kind of got me interested. Then I decided to go back. You don't know enough. You don't know nearly enough about food and culture. Go back. And again, NYU had a special scholarship available for people who wanted to major in nutrition and higher education. And this is something I always like to mention. Know what's going on in the profession and also at the national level in terms of employment trends. At the time, there was a shortage of higher education faculty. And so they were giving out scholarships to people who were interested in higher education. The opportunity fell in my lap and I said, I'm going with it. And it helped me in terms of getting that experience teaching in universities. But then I left and I got that job with Cornell. And I was thinking about it just before the call. That job with Cornell was probably the one where I learned the most in terms of nutrition and populations, because I had to develop lesson plans from pre-K through high school for those populations. But then I also didn't teach the lessons. It was paraprofessionals who taught the lessons. So then I had to teach paraprofessionals how to teach the lessons I had developed for all those different grades. Most of the paraprofessionals were single moms, indigent. So that was one thing. But then some of my paraprofessionals, especially in the summers, were college students and high school students. So then I also had to learn how to develop lessons for paraprofessionals with different backgrounds. So, trying to create a lesson on digestion for pre-K is different from a high school, and then teaching somebody else how to teach it but the populations were, again, that job, my territory was Harlem, Spanish Harlem, and then Upper West Side, which had a large Jewish but non-Hasidic population, and a lot of Cubans and Dominicans. So that kind of got me into those populations. Lower East Side had, of course, Italians, Asians, especially Chinese. It had some German and Polish from, living there. So it was a very multicultural and multiracial population. So, do that and then get a job with the Hispanic Health and Nutrition Survey, where I had to travel for 2 years between West Coast, South Florida, and Northeast to work with those populations. I learned that, Hispanics are not one homogeneous group, very, very different, and different political situations, because Puerto Ricans are citizens by birth. Puerto Rico is part of the United States. With the Mexican Americans, some of them were in the United States before it was the United States. So they didn't come from Mexico. The United States came to them, they're in those areas. And then some of them are immigrants and some are documented, some are not. And then Cuba in South Florida was a very different type of immigrant because they came almost in a privileged status where they would get a lot of financial aid and stuff because they were coming from a communist country. So honestly, all that food, culture, politics, finance, history, it just taught me that I didn't know nearly enough about how to work with people as it related to food and all those things that impact their food choices.
I love that story. You know, I think sometimes we get stuck in our silos and we forget about how important it is to have that understanding of where people are coming from and how that can affect not just the way they interact with us, but also the way that they're eating and the way that we work with them. And so your story of getting to work with a variety of ages, a variety of cultures, a variety of socioeconomic, political populations really touches home with, you know, how aware we need to make ourselves as we work with various populations and the understanding that, hey, we don't know everything about everybody. I think how important was the health and nutrition examination survey? You know, we're living in a time where they're talking about reducing some of that tracking and monitoring. How important are those surveys for us?
You know, those surveys are just, in my mind, amazingly important. The amount of information you get from them is invaluable, both from a practice perspective, but also from a research perspective. I mean, for me, it was a wonderful learning experience, and to be able to access that information, you know, to know what foods are eaten in this part of the country, what foods are eaten in that part of the country, what do they even call it? Do they even call them the same things? I mean, that was another thing. And that's not only limited to Hispanics, it's also the mainstream population. I mean, I remember living in Boston and finding out that a frap is what I call a milkshake. Or, you know, you go to some parts of the country and a Subway is a hoagie or a hero. So the surveys give you that kind of information. And it's important to know that it's there and to be able to access it. Another one that I used a lot in the most recent past is the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which doesn't have a lot about nutrition. It's a survey about behaviors in teenagers. And, you know, it relates to dietary, physical activity, sexual behavior, drug behavior. And so one of the things I would do is I would have the students compare the local data to the state data to the national data so they can get a better sense of how does it compare what I'm doing here with what's going on nationally or in the state, and how do I then tailor? And that's what the Haynes data does, the 10-state survey does, a lot of the food consumption and food purchasing data. You know, we couldn't really do our job if we didn't know what's going on and use that information, both in terms of research, but also in terms of practice.
Yeah, I think it's so important for us to be thinking about those implications as we look forward into the use of these various national surveys and why, you know, they have been important for so many years as we look at practice situations. So coming back to, you said you had these experiences and you felt like, hey, I need to learn more. So you end up going to Rutgers, and instead of getting a PhD in nutrition, you got one in cultural anthropology. So a little bit of a different variation. Tell me about that decision.
Well, that was a crazy decision, but I'm glad I made it. My husband used to go, every time you go for a degree, you get something different. Because, you know, it was the nutrition baccalaureate and the higher ed master's now. And I used to tell him, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, to be honest. So early in my career, I was fortunate to have wonderful mentors. One of the mentors that I had, she was actually a home economist, but she had gotten her doctorate in anthropology. And so that kind of got me thinking. I value nutrition science, and I think it's wonderful that, you know, people who do nutrition science are helping us progress in knowledge of the science itself. But I knew that that wasn't my area of interest. My area of interest was food and culture, because that's all the, you know, all those experiences I'd had, I realized that I was ignorant, quite frankly, about all these other factors. And so I looked around, and actually I found that there was a professor at the time at Rutgers University who used to do a lot of research in South America. And her research was really specific to food and food habits. So even though she wasn't a nutritionist or RD, she had that other piece of information that I lacked. And so, she became a mentor for me too during my studies. Now, her area was different because she had focused on Latin America, but at least I found a professor who had an interest in foods and culture. And so that's really what led me to that. And I like to mention that that's something really important that I think dietitians need to consider. And I thought about it too in relationship to this phone call. I think we need to know that the DPD and the dietetic internship and the RD exam are the base. They're just a starting point of knowledge. That's all they are. And that's all they're supposed to be, because we are going to have to keep learning in order to be good at what we do. So think of it only as your starting point, and from there you take on. And there's two routes that you can go. You can either specialize or diversify. And I think that, for example, clinical dietitians who focus in renal or pediatrics or oncology, they are specializing, and that we need that. And then there's some that are kind of like me. We're dilettantes. We diversify. We do a little bit of everything, and we're not great at anything, but we do a little bit of everything because we like that. Knowing that my area of interest was culture, not nutrition science, I knew that I had to find something that could help me expand my area of knowledge in that way. And so your early jobs, I think, kind of give you a sense of which way you want to go so that then you can continue to learn. And honestly, if you're anything like me, you realize that you'll never, ever, ever know it all, but at least you know what it is you want to know, and you can go in that direction.
Well, as a diversified dietitian myself, I very much appreciate that sentiment. My doctorate's actually in family relations, similar rationale. So I love the idea of getting to merge nutrition with an area that you feel would be really helpful for you as a practitioner and researcher and professional. So I very much appreciate that.
Yeah, and it helps you develop your own niche. And that's an important part of what becomes your self-identity and your ability to promote yourself as a dietitian. You know what your niche is, and you value and respect others for their niche, but you know what yours is too.
So after finishing this degree program, you came to Florida and you joined the faculty of the University of North Florida, where you had many different roles, including graduate dietetic internship program director, department chair. You became a distinguished professor. You're now emeritus there. You also consulted for companies. You wrote several books for the general population, including one that was for the Florida Academy to be able to teach about nutrition and different populations. What kind of motivated you to do all of these different types of things?
Well, I don't like doing the same thing all the time. I don't know, maybe it's just I have a short attention span or something, but I like to do different things. And so that's the other thing. You need to know who you are. And so that was one of the things. Moving to Florida was not really an original choice. My husband got transferred. And so, I had to come to Florida. And so that's my other, I think, important messages. You need to learn to be flexible. And you need to learn to look for opportunities when life doesn't turn out the way you planned. Because I can tell you, I think 99.9% of the time, life will not give us what we planned, okay? And if you're not flexible, it's hard then to be successful. I moved to Florida with my husband. At the time, if you notice, I had been doing some consulting, mostly related to the Hispanic population. Well, I moved to Jacksonville, and at the time, Jacksonville was less than 2% Hispanic. So I knew that my consulting days were over, that I needed to learn to transition. And I think some of your other persons have mentioned that you need to be able to adapt to the environment and what the needs are. So I did some different jobs related to universities or the community college, adjunct teaching, continuing education, some off-site consulting where I would have to travel to other places, including working with industry. But then a job opened up at the university as a college advisor. And that, again, you got to learn to be flexible. And I had finished my doctorate, but there were no faculty lines in nutrition. So I took a job as a college advisor. And it was to be a college advisor for the newly installed College of Health. Now, every job you have teaches you something if you're willing to learn. And it was fantastic because as a college advisor, I learned so much about how students come into the college, how they get admitted, the admission process, what are all the different issues and needs that they have. And then I learned how to maneuver pretty much every department that has anything to do with students, financial aid, housing, you name it, clubs. And then what happened was, at the time, there was a nutrition course that was taught. And there was one nutrition faculty, but she was not an RD. She was a PhD nutrition. And so she and I worked to get an approved baccalaureate or DPD nutrition program. So we did hire some consultants, some of which were nutrition persons in Florida, some of them very well known, to help us develop this program. Now, I know this sounds kind of sneaky, but I knew that in order to have an approved program, you had to have an RD faculty director. And I was the only RD on campus. So I knew if they got the program, they weren't going to have a choice, at least temporarily, but to put me in that position as director.
You create your job.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You look at opportunities, you see where they are, and you just forge ahead and create the opportunities. And so, of course, that's what happened. That's how I became a faculty. And then over time, we figured, okay, well, now we have the baccalaureate, but we need an internship. So then we worked to get the internship. And then that's when a little bit later, online instruction became popular. And we said, and we were probably one of the first online programs, I'm sure, in the university, if not the first. Then we had other faculty who also like to look at opportunities, and we saw that there's only one doctorate in clinical nutrition in the country. We can be the second, and so part of, I guess, my message would be is always look for what's happening in the outside world and how you can use it to create opportunities for yourself and for your profession.
I think that is such an inspiring story. And for those that are not part of academics, just to give some context, it is very hard to create any kind of faculty line, let alone go from being an advisor to then a faculty member to then eventually chair. So just the momentous accomplishment that you were able to do there by creating those opportunities is kind of insane when you think about it, right? Like, you built a department.
Well, it's just sometimes I think, and I always used to joke about it and say, sometimes there's like a giant neon sign in front of you, and you just have to look at it and take advantage of it. And sometimes I think we ignore the neon signs because we're afraid of risk.
Well, that is a neon sign and some beautiful leadership strategy combined, for sure. So do you see yourself as a change maker in the field?
What's funny is that I didn't. I didn't. I don't know if I still do. I think I have two philosophies. One of them is, as I mentioned before, look for opportunities and grab them. And you never know where they'll take you. So, and sometimes I've worked with some dietitians who say, I don't want to take that job because it pays me a little less, or I don't want to take the job because, it's something I don't know. Well, my husband used to sometimes get angry because I would change jobs so often. And sometimes I'd be making less than I was making, the time before. And I'd say, yeah, but if it was usually because I saw that there was something I could learn that I didn't know, or that it was something that would give me a skill or an opportunity for something later. And so part of it is having that vision that, like with higher ed, well, I didn't want to major in higher ed. I didn't want to study higher ed, but I thought, well, that's an opportunity for possible jobs in academia in the future. That I wasn't thinking about academia at the time, but I thought, why not open that door a little bit in case I want to walk in? So one of them is always take advantage of possible opportunities, and don't think about the money. Think about what you can learn or what you can do. And that's the guiding principle for me. And then the other one, I kind of used to joke and say, if you see that something is not working, you really have an obligation to try to fix it. Because if you don't work toward making it better, you've actually chosen to fail. And to me, failing is not an option. And that's the other thing too. I think when, and everywhere, and I'm sure you've seen it, you may be working in a certain area or a certain place or doing a certain thing, and you realize, this doesn't work. Why do you keep doing it? To me, that's like saying I'm willing to fail. And so that, I think, would move me to try and do certain things. And I'll tell you, that's kind of like how I got involved with the academy. So once we got the DPD program going, I realized I'm the only RD. I'm hiring adjuncts and the nutrition science person, but I'm responsible for this baccalaureate. I don't know what other people are doing around the country. I don't know what's on that RD exam. How do I know that the curriculum I put together is the best? I don't. So that's why I got involved with the Commission on Dietetic Registration, with item writing for the exam, because I wanted to learn what are the books that most people around the country use? What are the topics that they tend to focus on? I really felt like if I didn't do that, my program could fail.
I love that message of empowerment, of don't just leave things. It is your job to fix it and to not fail. I think, as we look at dietitians, we tend to be a type A group. We don't like to fail. We like to get our A's and everything. And that continues into our professional careers of not wanting to fail. But I don't know that everyone thinks of, well, if I don't change the thing that's going wrong, that is me failing. And that's such an empowerment message that, I don't have to leave things the way they are. If it's not working, I can go and make a difference and change it. That's going to be better, not only for myself in this position, but also for the field. And that's just so powerful. And I love how that motivated you to get involved in the academy, to be able to make sure that your program was able to be successful. But you didn't stop there in the academy. It wasn't just accreditation for you. You became a board member of the Latinos and Hispanics in the Dietetics and Nutrition Member Interest Group. You were in the nominating committee. You were on the diversity committee. You were chair of task force. You were on the House of Delegates. And eventually, you became the president of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, making you the third in Florida history to be in that role. What was that like?
Well, it's funny because it's the same thing. I think that I started to learn a lot serving in CDR, but then other things come up where, quality improvement committee. Well, how do I know to teach our students to do quality improvement? So, you get on that committee. If you're constantly learning, you always find that there's something else you can learn. And the Academy has so many committees that there's something you can learn from all of them. It's in some ways, it's hard to not get overwhelmed, but, you kind of pick and choose based on what you think you need to learn at that time. And that's how I got involved with a lot of those things. The other thing too is that at the time there was an issue, and it still is, about, do we have enough persons with diverse backgrounds in the profession? And I felt like that would be an area where I could contribute. And I'm glad I have. And I'm so happy that the Academy now has all these different groups, cultures of age, Asian Indian, and pretty much all the member interest groups, Nobadan, they're all wonderful. And now we have relatively new one on disabilities. which is another one that I think is very important. So it was, you just kind of grow into different roles. And actually, I mentioned this at Fancy this week, that it's important to volunteer. And a lot of times we don't volunteer because we're afraid that we don't know how to do the job, or we're not sure that we know how to do the job. And it's the same thing like we had talked about with failing. You don't fail if you try to change something for the better. You just learn that that other thing didn't work either. So you move on to something else. That's what you have to look at it. And with the academy and becoming president, to me, that was another wonderful opportunity for learning. I learned a lot about the different needs of our members, the different areas of practice, how the political landscape shapes our profession, how all the different food programs and the role we could possibly have in them. And then I learned a lot, about the DPGs, but also the member interest groups and also the affiliate, and how all these needs are different, and how the organization, the academy, is really trying to juggle all these different kinds of needs. So how do you do it in a way that is equitable to all the groups? And that to me was a big challenge, because, you'll have these people saying you need to do more for us, and this group saying you need to do more for us. And you realize, yeah, you need to do more for all of them actually, but how do you balance it in a way that's equitable? And so that to me was an eye-opener, but I also got to meet so many different people and make friends that it really was worth it. The other thing too that I think was most important for me to learn was that regardless of my personal interests, I was president to all members. And so while I may have liked to do a lot with underrepresented groups, and I did as much as I could, I had to make sure that I was also doing for all the other groups, for the DPGs, for the, affiliates, keeping in mind the budget. And that's, I think, an important role for anybody who's in leadership, to make sure that you're representing everybody, even if you don't like them. And I'm not saying I didn't like them, but I know that I've seen in leadership where people with biases will ignore groups that they should be advocating for. And to me, that's not acceptable.
Yeah, that's a really hard balance, right? You have so much going on. You have to be aware of what those implicit biases are to be able to make those decisions and really recognize, am I giving the right treatment to everybody and still aligning with the goals of the organization? It sounds like it is a huge juggling act when you're talking about so many different groups of people at such a large level. Like the scale of the academy is such a big scale.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I also like to say is, when you get into these positions of leadership, it's not about being liked. And if you only want to do things where you're liked, then you shouldn't be in leadership, because there'll always be somebody who won't be happy with what you do. But you have to put it in context and keep asking yourself, was I fair and equitable? And then if I was, know that one or two people won't be happy, and that's okay. In the context over the long term, the fact that you did what was fair and equitable will win out.
Yeah, absolutely. And you really took that a step further during that year. You wrote a couple of articles in the journal, and one of them was on servant leadership, which I thought was really fascinating. And you talk about the importance of dietetics as a serving field. How can current and future dietitians really incorporate those lessons of servant leadership in their roles at the academy and the profession as a whole?
Well, I think it goes back to, and that helped me. That really helped guide me, because it's really about putting aside your personal agenda and doing what is best for the people for whom you are chosen to serve. And so, again, it takes a lot of, I think, self-reflection for anybody, including dietitians, to be able to self-reflect and say, is this something I want, or is this something that the members want? Just because I want it doesn't mean it's the right thing. I'm here to represent and do what's best for them. Now, sometimes what is best may not be what everybody likes, but by looking at the evidence, that's best. I'll give you an example. And I know that there's still maybe one or two people who aren't happy about it, but now it's so long ago, it doesn't matter. One of the things I worked most on, and I would probably say was my most proudest achievement, was changing the name of the organization. Okay, so we went from the name American Dietetic Association to Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. Let me tell you, it took a lot of money of researching stakeholders, consumers, members, non-members, looking at research regarding name and word recognition and attitudes toward names and words. I can tell you that the term dietetics tends to have a negative connotation. People think of it as a diet or as being ill. And so when you ask people about American Dietetic, they thought we only dealt with sick people. Okay. I mean, and I'm generalizing because I don't have all the specific data, but as a general, that was it. When you asked about the image, old lady in white orthopedic shoes. When you asked about nutrition, they thought of wellness. Okay. They thought of a more modern or contemporary image of a person. And the other thing, that ADA was confused. So if you said ADA, they think you're a dentist, you're a dancer, you've got diabetes. It was like, oh my gosh, this name confusion is killing us. Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, a couple of things. AC, comes before NU or any other thing. So you think of how does it place when you're looking at something that might pop up alphabetically. Academy has a more respected kind of term, and nutrition really was about promoting wellness, which seemed to fall out of dietetics. And so keeping dietetics was also to honor the past and dietitians who were just like flabbergasted that we would even consider changing the name. So again, you see, it's a combination of looking at all the facts, looking at the historical context, looking at future projections of what people are looking for, what they want, how they see a word. And, we had to change it. I'm glad we did. Not everybody was happy about it, but again, that's what leadership's about.
I love that. I remember when the name changed and we were all like, wait a minute, we went from ADA to and. Is it and? Is and what we're saying now? So I very much remember the rhetoric behind those changes. And then we all adjusted and got used to it. And now we're the Academy, and the new people coming up never remember it as ADA. And so it made a big difference. And I think that's such an important point as well is, we talk a lot about the perception of who dietitians are and what we do and how are we portraying that out to the world. And so that name change is such a great example of trying to improve that perception using what's kind of a small thing, right? Just our name, to be able to project a very different vision and image. But I can imagine the backlash from some of those older dietitians that were set in their ways.
Yeah. And, and people say, oh, we've got to honor our past, and that's the name we had. And again, I agree. We have to honor our past, but we have to look to the future. And nutrition is a much more positively resounding word than dietetics. So we try to balance that both. And the other thing is we want to take back ownership of nutritionists, because in some places nutritionists could be anybody. So it's like, no, we're the Academy and we've got nutritionists and dietitians.
We are nutrition.
Right. Exactly.
I love that. Continuing with some of the things you wrote as president, in one of your final essays, the year that you were president of the Academy, you said, as many of you know, diversity in all its forms is one of my areas of interest. We may all look different, but if we all think alike or do the same work, there's no diversity. A house divided will fail, but we cannot fail. In fact, we will all benefit if we use our differences as strengths and work on our goals together. How do you feel that we're doing in terms of diversity within our field now? It's been 15 years. Things have changed a little bit. What do you think?
Well, I think things have changed, but I don't think they've changed as fast as I would have liked for them to change. And I do fear that they could be sort of a falling back. And so I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I'm hoping that we've moved enough that if we start to fall back, we'll kind of be kicked back forward. And I think part of what makes me think that is the fact that we now have a disabilities MIG, which we didn't have before, which means that we had forgotten an important group. And I do believe that diversity will continue to be of paramount importance in our profession. And I don't mean diversity only in terms of racial or ethnic, because we need diversity in terms of practice. And so I'm glad that we have all these different practice groups, and I'm glad that, you know, even some will continue to emerge. I'm sure with technology, there's going to be some emergence of some practice areas that focus more on technology and areas where I can't even imagine. And we want to have that strength of diversity in practice. The other reason, too, it's really important is the world is getting more and more global. And again, that was the other thing. American Dietetic kind of pinned us to we're only interested in the US, but we're not. We've got people who are practicing all around the world. We've got, you know, the global MIG, the international group. So we needed to show that our vision is more than the US. We're the biggest in the world. We are based in the United States, but our practice is all around the world. And so we need to have diversity of backgrounds, of race and ethnicity, but also in terms of practice areas. And I mean in terms of discipline, but also in terms of global. And we'll start falling behind if we don't do that. I'm happy that we belong to the International Confederation of Dietetic Associations, because that's an organization of nutrition organizations around the world. And we're a main component, a big component of that. We have to be. I do want us to become more diverse internally. We still have only about 2 to 3% African American and Black. I think only about 6%, maybe 8% of Hispanics. I think about 6% Asian. And on persons with disabilities, probably less than 1. And I know with Asian Pacific, it's also probably less than 1 or maybe at most 2. And when you think about how, I mean, Florida is almost 30+% African American, and we've got about 2%. That doesn't mean that people of different groups can't serve other groups, but I think that it helps provide more resources within our organization when we have people who know those groups well and who have lived in that cultural context.
Yeah, I love that definition of diversity too, not just looking at race or cultural background, but thinking about diversity of age and diversity of abilities and diversity of dietetics practice area, and then world diversity, you know, as being so important to us being able to come up with innovative and interesting ideas. I have the benefit of living in Miami, right? So we have lots of different types of people.
That's right. That's right. Another thing too that, you know, I worry about is that when you don't have diversity, you give away your profession. For example, think of people with disabilities. Actually, you know, you think of minority and they say, well, it's about 12, 14% Hispanic. Well, disabled is probably closer to 1/5 of the population or more. So that's an even bigger minority that we really aren't prepared, or I don't think we've done enough to learn how to serve. And it could be, you know, what if it's somebody who's blind, or somebody with a speech impediment, or somebody with limited arm function or limited leg function. Those are people with disabilities. That's like maybe 1/4 of your population, 1/5 to 1/4 of your population. And how many of us are trained to work with them? Blind is just, and what made me think about it is that we have a school for the blind in Florida. And I kept thinking, I don't teach my students how to work with people within that cultural context. That's a culture in and of itself. Swallowing, you know what will happen? Other therapists will take that work because we don't know how to do it. So we give away our profession when we don't have diversity of many different areas.
I think that's a really good point, and one that we probably don't talk about enough, right? Again, I think you think of diversity, you think immediately of culture or race or background, but it's such a bigger definition in terms of how we can work with people and what we should be thinking about in the future, and just making sure that, especially when you talk about disabilities, is everything, are they able to get access to everything that we have going on? Are they getting on the website easily? Are they listening to this podcast? So, really taking into consideration what the barriers are for different groups is so important. And then working together to come up with solutions. So you were honored in 2015 with a Medallion Award. How was that experience for you?
Humbling, I can tell you, because I know when you get a call from somebody who says, I want to nominate you, you say, there's no way I could ever get this. I haven't done enough. I don't know why I would be getting it. And to know that your peers recognize you for your accomplishments, I think is really, I don't know, it's just really humbling. And it makes you feel like you need to make sure that you become worthy of it by doing more stuff, I think is really it. And also, you go back and you think about what are the steps and who are the people that got me here. And I think about a lot of, people that taught me something that helped me get to where I am. And it goes back to one of my very first early mentors. I remember that she said to me, every person you meet will teach you something that you can take away, and it could be positive or negative. I mean, I've worked in some places where the person was a horrible person, and I learned that that's not what I wanted to be, or that wasn't something specific I wanted to do. But she kind of put that in my mind, and I think it helped me appreciate that every person I meet gives me something. And that's what the medallion makes you realize too. You forget it, and then you remember, I didn't get here by me. I got here because, there was always somebody somewhere that did something that helped me accomplish what I was trying to accomplish. And it's good to know, but it also makes you realize that you need to do the same.
I love that. And I can imagine the many people that you have touched in your many roles and have passed that message along to that are also succeeding. And I know in some of our interviews that has come up from other people that we've interviewed, is just how inspirational you have been within the field. What role would you say that the Florida Academy and the National Academy have had on your career?
Oh my goodness. This is why I'm here now. I think it was, again, that same thing about a welcoming environment. That's why I'm so, I don't think of diversity only as diversity. I think of it as access and inclusion. Because I remember when I moved to Florida and going to a local meeting, that some of the dietitians were very welcoming. And that made me feel like, especially when you move to a new place and you don't know anybody, and you go to a meeting and people make you feel welcome, it helps you become engaged and willing to be a part of that. And so because of that, then you serve on committees, you work on certain things with them, you help with certain projects. But if you don't feel welcome, you're not going to do that. You're going to go to that meeting and then never go back. But, Kathy Christie, I remember there was a local dietitian who's not in town anymore, Lenore Greenstein. I mean, there were so many, Helen Jackson, that were welcoming. And Tony Martin's another one who was very good to me and helped me feel like a part of the local organization. And so with that, I served on some committees. I got involved with that. And then that kind of led to the other meetings. And Florida used to have some of the best, and still does, some of the best state meetings around. So going to the meetings was about going and learning, but also about hanging out with friends and making new friends. And that's how I got involved. So again, the issue with, I think, membership is that you really want to, I think, engage people personally at the local level and then help them with other things. And it's the same thing, they would ask me, can you serve on this committee? And I'm thinking, I don't know how to do that. But that's okay because you get on the committee and they help you. They teach you how to do it. And so with each step that you think you can't, you find out that you can. But if you say you can't and you don't, then you never get to move to that step.
I love that message of inclusion and friendship. I think that that is a common theme that we are hearing in all of the interviews so far, is that, you know, it's more than just a professional group. It's a group of friends. It's a group of people that support you. It's a group of individuals that are helping you become the person and dietitian that you could become. And it sounds like you had a very similar experience to that.
And I, you know, and they're still like that, which is great. So over time, some of my best friends what turned out to be dietitians. They became my best friends in my new environment. Yeah.
So as we come to a close today, what would you say is your hope for the future of dietetics across our state?
So many things. I guess I would say, you know, greater recognition, a deepened respect, and financial reimbursement for dietitians. Of course, you know, the increase in pay, because in a way we equate pay with recognition, but it doesn't always go that way. And licensure to protect the profession, of course, needs to stay. But a viable state organization is going to be critical for all of those things. And so from that perspective, you know, Florida as an affiliate, and we really have been lucky that Florida is one of the best, I think, affiliates in the academy. We've developed wonderful leaders, and I've been blessed by that. But we've had, you know, like you mentioned before, we've had probably the most presidents of any state. We've got members that are involved with all kinds of national, they're well known as entrepreneurs and individual practice. So keeping the state affiliate strong, in my mind, is one of my most important desires. And I know that with that, they can help with the other things I mentioned, which are, you know, the recognition, the respect, and the financial recognition too that we deserve.
Well, thank you again for taking the time to chat with me today, a little bit about your journey and your experience with the Florida Academy and the Maine Academy, and for your work in changing the name of the Academy. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I really am blessed to have had you think of me.
We are back, Kalitha. Did I not tell you about her game plan?
This episode did not disappoint. Okay, from this, what hasn't this medallion winner, what hasn't she done? From academia to being an author to a consultant, all of these things, like, what? I'm just blown away. Wow. 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 Wow.
I know. I think that listening to her story is just so inspirational. I love the way that she didn't wait around for opportunities. She developed opportunities. She thought outside of the box. She picked complementary majors so that she didn't have everything in one area. So that way she could innovate and really develop her own place within the field of dietetics and nutrition. And that is what she really did in her career.
She really did. Like when she said, like, look for the opportunities and grab them, like she really did it, right? Such an inspiration. Truly. Wow.
And can we just talk about the name change? It was so interesting to hear the details of what happened when we changed, because I remember when I was in school, and this is
I remember too. Yes. I remember too when the name changed. Yes, yes.
It was ADA, and we were like, what are we going to be? And?
Yes, yes. But see, it all worked out, right? So one thing I loved about Dr. Rodriguez is like, she is such a visionary, right? Like, who would have thought, like, she had this quote unquote small idea to change the name of our national organization. And like, I love the reasons that she gave behind it. So that way people can associate us as the nutrition expert, just to paraphrase her, of course. But I just like, I love how she took that risk, and look at where it takes us to where we are now. She's a vision. She's a vision.
Absolutely. Just having the courage. And I'm sure there was a team behind those changes, but having the courage to be that spokesperson in the moment of when that was happening, and really leading the charge, knowing that people weren't gonna necessarily like it or agree with it. And I think that sometimes when we are trying to create change, we have to understand that not everyone's going to be on the same page, and that's okay. But we need and we have a responsibility to explain what we're doing, and have a good rationale for why we're making these changes.
Absolutely. And that just goes to show to her character, right? Like at the end of the day, the foundation is that she was all about being a leader for all people. And, sometimes, like she said, that will ruffle a few feathers, right? But we get to lead the charge anyway because it's for the greater good. So, wow, such good lessons in this podcast episode. Like, can we also talk about, right, how she is just such an advocate for students and making them feel at home as they built the dietetics program at UNF? Like,
and it wasn't just students, she is about making everybody feel included. And I think
absolutely.
that message came out loud and clear with her. She talks about her work from the very beginning, working with a variety of different communities and being able to make them feel heard. And then continuing that through her academic experiences and then through her leadership with the academy about, and not just based on a race or ethnicity or a cultural background, but thinking about, people with disabilities and other people that sometimes get left out of those conversations. How can we bring everyone together? And it's such a powerful message.
It truly is. It definitely gets you to stop and think, like, how can I share this message or make this message accessible to more than the people that I'm reaching? So, wow. Again, Dr. Rodriguez, our hat is off to you. What a trailblazer.
Really, we are so lucky with this podcast to get to have these conversations and learn from such amazing dietitians. And hopefully you all are enjoying the podcast as much as we're enjoying creating it. So don't forget, like and subscribe, add your comments, and let us know what you're thinking about the podcast and where we should go from here.
Absolutely. We look forward to hearing from you guys, and we look forward to learning more from the future trailblazers. But until next time, we'll see you.